Welcome to EDSE 457. This is our chapter this week on writing across the curriculum. And so you should have read for this chapter 9 in your textbook. And I've just pulled out some of the big ideas from chapter 9 to talk about writing across the curriculum. So they talk about this idea of the reading and the writing connection. So we spend a lot of time talking about reading strategies, and so then there's this connection between reading and then pairing it together with writing. So why writing? Well, writing facilitates learning by helping students to explore, clarify, or think a little bit more deeply about the ideas and the concepts that they've encountered in their reading. A lot of people would say there's little to be gained from teaching reading apart from writing, because it really does facilitate or help them start to think a little bit more deeply about what they read. So it's a really good follow-up or a really good pair to the reading piece. If you think about yourself, you often hear people say things like, oh, I take a lot of notes because I don't really understand it until I write it down or until I put it in my own words. So giving students strategies that give them the opportunity to do that can really strengthen how much they take away from that reading. So there's two, when we talk about writing, we talk about process writing, which is what I went over that first class, which is this, right? So you've got the actual process: pre-writing, drafting, responding, revising, editing, and publishing. But when we're talking about writing across the curriculum or writing in the content areas, we're not really talking about this as much. So this is more teaching students how to write. But when we're talking about giving opportunities to write across the curriculum, or we're talking about strategies for writing across the curriculum, we're really talking about the idea of writing to learn. So what is writing to learn? So these are those short, impromptu or informal writing tasks that help students think through the key concepts or ideas that were presented in their course, in their reading. All of the activities and all of the strategies can be kind of limited to really short bursts of time. So 5 minutes of class time, or small out-of-class assignments, something that's only going to take them, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So this is not in-depth, long writing prompts. This is not writing essays. This is not necessarily writing research reports. There's the time and the place for that, but when we talk about writing across the curriculum, we're really thinking about that connection between reading and writing. So how do we give students those opportunities to write about what they've read or write about what they're learning to really help them summarize, think deeply about what they just read or what they heard or what they learned, and kind of start to put it together and to make connections. So kind of inherent in the idea that that's the goal or the purpose is the time constraint. These are, again, not long 5-paragraph essays, because for you as the teacher, you don't necessarily need a 5-paragraph essay to see that students are understanding the material, or to see that they have to write, because also writing a 5-paragraph essay includes instruction on this piece, right? So if you're going to have students writing these really long pieces or writing reports, then you're getting into more of the process of how to write. And that's not really what we're going for in these content area writing strategies. We're going for using writing as a vehicle to extend the learning. So some of the strategies that we use when we're talking about writing to learn, and I'll go into a few more in depth in a few minutes, but reading journals, and there's many different types of journals. I'm sure you read about them in your textbook. Summary writing, so kind of more generic summaries like what did you learn today, or very focused, tell me about XYZ, or tell me about what you read in chapter 2, sections 35, pages 35 to 37. Annotations, so teaching them how, and we'll talk about that a little bit more with the journals, how to take notes, essentially. Response papers, synthesis papers. So those are your bigger ideas. So you do use essays and more in-depth reports, but that's just one way of writing to learn. Learning logs, which is another type of journaling. So kind of pre-test warm-ups, using letters to analyze events or to discuss important concepts, project notebooks, and again, different types of journals. So journaling is a really common way to include writing in the content area classroom. So one of the important things about all of the writing opportunities that you provide for students is that you get a really good prompt. So in many of the activities, they require the teacher to develop some type of prompt. Some of them you'll see are more generic or allow the students to come up with the prompts, but very often it's the teacher writing the prompt. And so there is an art to writing those prompts, because those prompts are going to help stimulate that reflection through the writing to learn activity. And so thinking about what it is that I want to see in my students' writing should help inform the type of prompt that you use. And so I've included some key words that you could put in prompts. So thinking kind of a backwards planning, right? Thinking about the tasks that you want or the type of writing that you would like to see from your students can help you use some of these keywords in the prompts. And then the more kind of consistently and frequently that you use these keywords, students start to understand that when I hear the word explain, that's what my teacher is asking for. When I hear identify, show, tell about, this is what my teacher is asking for. So these are just kind of some ideas for you to think about when I give a short writing prompt, when I give my students one of these writing to learn activities. That question or that prompt that I give them is really going to influence the quality or the depth or what I'm looking for in their written response. And so just as a few examples, can't find my little cursor here. Okay. Yep, my cursor keeps disappearing. There it is. So if I want students to kind of discuss a process, a particular problem, I want them to kind of discuss an event or make an event. I want them to be able to include examples or reasons. So I may want to ask them to do things like, explain XYZ, discuss XYZ, explore XYZ. If I want them to talk about similarities and differences, I want to make sure that I use words like compare, contrast, discuss the similarities and differences. So I want to make sure that I use these words in the prompt if these are the types of tasks that I would like to see from them. If I want them to, in their writing, be able to demonstrate or explain or discuss causes and effects, showing how things relate to one another, then I'm going to ask them to analyze. I may use the actual term cause and effects, examine, show how, explain why, but I want to be as specific as I can in my prompts. And so here are just some more examples, and you can read through these in a little more depth on this PowerPoint. But really kind of thinking about being very specific in that prompt and using writing to learn not just as always kind of a generic like summarize what you took away from today's class, or just tell me about this one thing, or just describe what you learned today. But in those prompts you sometimes want to be very specific, and then the way that you do that is to do that backwards planning piece, so to think about what it is that why are you writing. I mean, why you are trying to get evidence of some type of understanding or learning or comprehension. And so specifically think about the types of things you would like to see them write on their paper, and then how do you develop a prompt that's going to get at that piece. So I just pulled out a couple of strategies that are some pretty easy strategies that you don't really need to do a lot of planning for, besides developing a nice prompt. Unsent letters, there's an example of this one on page 289, but this is a really neat prompt that I've seen used many times in classrooms. And essentially, in this activity, the students kind of enter this role play situation. So they respond to whatever the content or the material being studied in the lesson or being read that day is by writing letters. So these obviously letters that are not going to be sent. But it's really neat because it requires students not just to use their imagination, but depending on how well you can develop that prompt, you can really engage your students in interpretive and evaluative thinking. So an example could be having them write to a historical figure that's important in whatever it is that you're studying, some other type of famous person, someone in their student's life. What you're getting at is that whatever it is that they put in the letter is a reflection of how much they understand the material that you're working with right now. And so again, do you want them to be able to explain kind of a particular point of view? Do you want them to be able to, let's say if it was a historical figure or a literary figure, why that particular figure? Like, what's the information that you want them to be able to convey to that particular person if you've chosen that person? So often, as part of the prompt, you can tell them who they need to write to, but at other times it may be appropriate to have them choose. And so there's an example on page 289, and I believe that one is to President Obama. But what you would do with an unsent letter is it's like a 10-minute or so activity, not super long, and you can use it to as review for a previous day's lesson. You can use it to summarize the learning for that day. It's a good one that could be sent home and then brought back the next day and shared with partners or with the class. So nice strategy, allows students to go ahead and synthesize and pull together some of the things that they're learning about that particular content with the unsent letter. So then journals. I talked a lot about journals. So there's a couple or many different types of journals. So I just pulled out 3. And one of those is the reader response journals. So with the reader response journal, it's usually more not just a free write journal. It's a journal where they respond or they to a particular prompt or a particular task. And so as the teacher, you usually want to give them some direction about how they're going to respond to the learning, the reading, whatever it is. And so, these are just some examples of the things you could have students responding to. So they could be reading and they could be looking for new vocabulary words. They could be writing about the character that they identified most with in the story as a way to synthesize and to bring together some of that material. You could have them making predictions about what might happen next, writing about a part of whatever it was that they read that they liked or enjoyed. They can discuss kind of how the reading made them feel, maybe what they would have done in the situation described, if that makes sense for your content. Write about how they could use what they just read, and you can have those like open-ended or more directed activities. So, what advice would you give this particular character? What do you think is going to happen if this story continues? Why is this character like you? But with the reader response journal, you generally want to give the students something fairly specific to respond to. So some way to do that writing, which is unlike some of the other journaling activities. So I'm actually going to stop us here because I'm going to run out of my 15-minute time, and I will pick up on screencast 2.